Have you ever wondered how big companies solve these massive million-dollar problems, or how scientists really land on their big conclusions? Well, I can tell you one thing. They don't just guess. Nope, they follow a detailed plan, a kind of blueprint for discovery. So today, we're going to go behind the scenes and pull back the curtain on how these complex investigations are planned, and we'll use the world of tourism research as our guide.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with why a plan is everything in research. Then we'll dig into how you lay the groundwork, from a vague idea to something you can actually test. After that, we'll talk about choosing your tools and planning for the finish line before you even start. And finally, we'll wrap up with the real power of having a solid plan.
So, before we jump into the nitty-gritty, the step-by-step stuff, let's tackle the big why. Why is a plan so absolutely critical to getting results you can actually trust? I want you to imagine something for a second. Let's say you're running a big hotel, and all of a sudden, your bookings just fall off a cliff. This isn't a small dip. We're talking a high-stakes problem that could sink your business. So, what do? Where do you even begin to figure out what went wrong? Well, the answer is you don't guess. You really can't afford to. It's kind of like building a house, right? You don't just start hammering boards together and hope it looks like a house in the end. No way. You start with a detailed blueprint. And in research, that's exactly what your plan is. It's your blueprint for discovery, making sure you end up with something solid and reliable. There's this old saying that our source material brings up, and it just hits the nail on the head. A problem well-defined is a problem half-solved. It's such a great reminder that the most critical work doesn't always happen in the lab. It happens right at the very beginning, in the planning stage. See, any investigation you can trust is built on these three pillars. You've got objectivity, which just means the findings aren't colored by what the researcher wants to be true. Then there's reproducibility, meaning someone else could follow your exact recipe and bake the same cake. But the one that holds it all together for us today is systematization. For our hotel, this means we're not just randomly calling people. We have a logical plan where every single step is designed to lead us closer to a real answer. Okay, so let's get into the first phase of this journey. We're going to see how this actually works. This is all about laying that conceptual groundwork. It's about going from a fuzzy idea to a really sharp, testable question. Whoa, okay, I know this looks like a lot. This is the entire research blueprint from our source, from step A all the way to H. But listen, don't worry about memorizing every single box. Just think of it as our complete roadmap. We're just going to focus on the key stops along the way, starting with the first few that build the whole foundation. And to make this all feel a little more real, we're going to stick with one practical problem the whole way through. Why is room occupancy at Hotel X down? This is that million-dollar question we started with. Let's look at the first three steps on our map. First, you formulate the problem. You get super specific. It's not just, hey, business is down. It's, why is our occupancy down by 15% this quarter compared to last year? See the difference? Second, you review related research. A good researcher never starts from scratch. You see what other people have already figured out so you don't waste time reinventing the wheel. And finally, you define everything. This is where you get crystal clear on your terms and state a hypothesis you can actually go out and test. Now, this diagram might look a little technical, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. It shows how researchers go from a big abstract theory, that's the T on the left, all the way over to a very specific testable question on the right. Let's break down how you make that journey. The whole thing starts with a concept. A concept is just an abstract idea. So in tourism research, a common concept might be something like a well-traveled tourist. We all kind of get what that means, right? But how would you actually measure that? And that is where the operational definition comes in. This is the real magic step. It's where you take that abstract idea and make it totally concrete and measurable. So our concept of a well-traveled tourist is now defined as, let's say, someone who has traveled over 500 miles, at least once a year, for the last 5 years. Bam! Now we have something we can actually count. And once you've done that, you have what's called a variable. The variable is that final, measurable thing that can take on different values. It's stuff we're all familiar with, like age or income or how much somebody spends on a trip. These are the final puzzle pieces that researchers can actually analyze. Okay, so our foundation is set. The next phase is all about getting practical. This is where you start choosing the right tools for the job, picking your research design, how you're going to collect data, and who exactly you're going to study. We're back to our roadmap, and again, don't worry about the whole thing. Just look at that highlighted section in the middle. These next 3 steps, D, E, and F, are really the hands-on, practical core of the plan. This is where we decide how we're actually going to get the answers we're looking for.
So the first big choice is your research design. If you're just exploring a topic, you'd use a really flexible exploratory design. For our hotel problem, we might use a descriptive design to get a really accurate picture of who our guests were this quarter. But if we wanted to test if a new discount causes more bookings, we'd need a super controlled causal design to prove it.
Next up, you gotta pick your subjects. With probability sampling, every single person in the group you're studying has a known equal chance of being picked, kind of like a lottery. This is the gold standard if you want to say your findings represent the whole group. With non-probability sampling, it's usually faster and cheaper, like just interviewing people in the hotel lobby, but you have to be way more careful about saying your results apply to everybody.
So how do you actually get the info? Well, there are 3 main toolkits. You can use observation, which is literally just watching behavior as it happens. You can use direct communication, which is stuff like surveys and interviews. Or you could save a ton of time and money by using secondary data. That's information someone else has already collected, like census data.
All right, let's move to the final and maybe the most important part of planning. This is all about knowing your destination before you even put the car in drive. It's about deciding what you're going to do with all this data once you finally have it.
So get this, because this is probably the most crucial point. Great researchers do not wait until they have a mountain of data to figure out how to analyze it. They plan exactly how they're going to code and analyze every single thing before they collect even one response. Our source material makes it clear. Failing to do this is a classic, costly mistake. It's how you wind up with a ton of useless information, an empty budget, and still no answers to your million-dollar problem. So we've gone through the whole planning process, right? From that first vague problem to a detailed blueprint for getting answers. So what's the big takeaway here? What's the real power of doing all this planning?
You know, it really just boils down to these 3 key phases. First, laying the foundation, where you sharpen a broad topic into a specific, testable hypothesis. Second, choosing your tools, picking the right methods for your exact question. And third, and maybe most importantly, planning for the finish, where you map out your analysis right from the get-go. The power of this plan is that it turns pure guesswork into a systematic search for the truth. It makes sure the results are objective, reliable, and actually mean something. So I want to leave you with this final thought. The next time you see a headline that says, "A new study finds," or "Research shows that," maybe you'll stop for a second and ask yourself, what was the plan?